Presented by Sunday Crunch is compiled today by Charlie Cooper and Kate Day. 5 things to know. The Irish border question looks increasingly like the issue that might break Brexit negotiations. After Ireland's EU Commissioner Phil Hogan, speaking to The Observer, criticised UK ministers' blind faith that a free trade agreement could help avoid a hard border if Northern Ireland leaves the EU's customs union. Britain's International Trade Secretary told Sky's Niall Paterson there will be no final settlement on the border until there is agreement on the end state for UK-EU trade relations. That puts Theresa May on a collision course with Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, who has said he wants written guarantees on the border at the end of Phase 1 of Brexit talks and, if he isn't satisfied, may veto any December European Council resolution giving the green light for talks to progress onto trade. Varadkar, of course, could be facing a snap election at home before Christmas, though Ireland's Sunday Independent warns both main parties to pull back from the brink on its front page, and quotes Varadkar saying the country is in a strong position on Brexit in particular. Expect high political drama this festive season. May's Irish problem may be causing London, Dublin and Brussels untold grief, but her allies in Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party are unfazed. Politico's Annabel Dixon met May's other hard Brexit front, the DUP, whose MPs prop up her government, and meet her ministers at least once a week. Sammy Wilson, the party's Brexit spokesman, is surprised Boris Johnson and Michael Gove have reportedly acceded to giving more money, and DUP Chief Whip Jeffrey Donaldson urges May to hold the line on the financial settlement. DUP leader Arlene Foster set out her Brexit red lines in her conference speech yesterday. Other Brexit news: Labour could still keep the UK in the single market and a customs union. Shadow cabinet ministers John McDonnell and Barry Gardiner confirmed today. The opposition's stance was given new urgency as Shadow Brexit Secretary Keir Starmer warned in a Sunday Times interview that failure to break Brexit deadlock in December would raise questions about Theresa May's authority, adding that she has 2 weeks to save herself, save Brexit and save the economy. The paper interpreted that as a threat that, in the event of failure, Labour might table a no-confidence motion in the last week before Christmas. Meanwhile, Liberal Democrat leader Vince Cable now puts the chances of no Brexit at all at 20%. In a frank interview with Robert Peston, Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby spoke gravely about Brexit tensions, the Irish border debate, the economy and even Trump's America. On a brighter note, Archbishop of York John Sentamu kept a pledge he made 10 years ago, after he cut his dog collar to pieces live on Andrew Marr's show, vowing never to wear it again until Robert Mugabe was no longer president of Zimbabwe. In a memorable TV moment, Marr even returned the broken pieces of the Archbishop's collar, kept in a drawer for all those years. Quote of the day on the government's long-awaited industrial strategy, which is launched tomorrow. It is meant to be a big moment, but one Downing Street aide told the Sunday Times Tim Shipman we shouldn't get our hopes up. I've read really boring things like The Pilgrim's Progress and even I think it's boring, the aide said. A message from ørsted: do people care for green energy at all? Oh yes. See how many in the new Green Energy Barometer, the largest ever survey of attitudes towards renewables. More than 26,000 people across 13 nations were asked their opinion on green energy by the consultancy firm Edelman Intelligence on behalf of ørsted. The Andrew Marr Show takeaway: Labour doesn't rule out keeping the UK. The Single Market paper reviewers Rob Oxley, former Conservative advisor Ellie Mayo Hagan, journalist George Parker, Financial Times political editor Paul Johnson, director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies dire growth forecasts. They will be wrong, but they're as likely to be too optimistic as they are to be too pessimistic. Watch. This is probably the moment of greatest uncertainty, that we know about at least, that we've faced in a very, very long time. Barry Gardiner, Labour's Shadow International Trade Secretary. Single market: the government has ruled out remaining a member of the single market or a member of the customs union. We have not ruled those off the table. We said they are still options. We recognize the benefits both. Unfortunately, we are not at the negotiating table with the European Union. Watch. Hammond's budget: it went well for him personally, but this was a budget that actually admitted failure and then said, and we don't know what to do about failure. Watch. Ruth Davidson, Scottish Conservatives leader: Brexit deadline: if we don't make it through to the next 2 weeks to move on to that next phase, then we are rapidly going to run out of time in terms of getting us to a good position at the time that transitional deal is supposed to take place. Irish border: this is all subject to negotiation. We've got 2 weeks in which it's going to get pretty tousy, it's going to get pretty tough in that negotiating room. No off-the-shelf Brexit. We don't have to have an off-the-shelf solution because we are a different case to any other country that interacts with the EU. We're not Canada, we are not Norway, we are the only country that has previously been a part of the EU, that complies with every single rule and regulation of the EU that will then sit outside of it. Economic stimulus, we're headed for 2.4% of GDP to be put into long-term investment, that's the highest level for 40 years. John Sentamu, Archbishop of York, keeping a pledge. I promised that when Mugabe goes, I'd put my collar on, so I have no choice. Watch. Can Mugabe be forgiven? It's not for me, he never killed any of my relations. At the time the crimes were so raw, but what happened in South Africa with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, people were able to say, we are sorry we did this, and Mugabe at some point needs to say to the people of Zimbabwe, I took on a country which was fantastic and I nearly took it to ruin. Zimbabweans, forgive me. Peston on Sunday. Takeaway. Archbishop of Canterbury extraordinarily downbeat on state of politics and economy. Guests Labour MP Lisa Nandy and Conservative MP Nadeem Zahawi. Justin Welby, Archbishop of Canterbury. Economy. There's low unemployment, there's good news, but the thing we see now, the majority of people that come to the food banks are in work. That is a sign that work is not lifting people out of poverty in the way we would hope. Watch. Brexit culture wars. I think there needs to be much more discipline in our language. The use of expressions about public enemies, use of stuff like mutineers, all these headlines which seem conditioned to stir up hatred. Watch. Irish border. It's not just a question of trade and economics. At its heart it's the question of identity. This is one of the major issues we're discussing with the head of the Church of Ireland, the Archbishop of Armagh, whose diocese straddles the border. He obviously doesn't want to get to a point where he has to go through a checkpoint 30 times a day as he goes to and fro between parishes. Do you understand? Fundamentalist Christians' support for Trump. Do I say what I think or do I say what I should say? I'm going to say what I think. No, I don't understand it. I really, genuinely do not understand where that is coming from. John McDonnell, Shadow Chancellor Labour. Brexit options. We've said all the way along that customs union, single market, all these options have got to be on the table now as part of the negotiations. Liam Fox. I'm worried about this news from Liam Fox this morning. I think the one thing we don't want to do is jeopardize any movement quickly, because we need movement to enable us to get into the proper trade negotiations, so I'm hoping that isn't a Downing Street sanction statement that he's made. What a Labour budget would look like. The rates at historic lows. This is the time to borrow. Now is the time to use public investments. Sunday with Niall Paterson. Takeaway. EU must put people's prosperity ahead of politics, says Fox. Guests economist Dr. Linda U. Ruth Lee, economic advisor to the Arbuthnot Banking Group. David Willits, executive chair of the Resolution Foundation. Mark Wallace, editor of Conservative Home. Sophie Gaston, deputy director of Demos Politicos. London Playbook editor. Jack Blanchard. Liam Fox, international trade secretary. Does the UK want to join TPP? Talking about future membership of TPP is a little bit too far in advance yet, but we've no preconceptions about where we will end up. No deal Brexit. We'd rather get a deal with the European Union, but we're not afraid not to get a deal. UK trade. One of the things that's being overlooked is that we still have to up our trade. If you look at the UK as a whole, we export only about 28% of our GDP. Germany, by contrast, exports about 47%. So whether we'd have stayed in the EU or not, we'd have still had to make a lot of improvements in our trading performance. Will standards drop? We wouldn't want to see our standards drop, because in particular if you're selling UK goods abroad, people look to us to have very high standards of safety, of clarity about origin, and so on. The UK is never going to be able to compete at the cheap end of the market. We're always going to compete at the quality end of the market, and that's a plus for the UK. Northern Ireland. We don't want there to be a hard border, but the United Kingdom is going to be leaving the customs union and the single market. We've always actually had exceptions for Ireland. We can't get a final answer to the Irish question until we get to an idea of the end state. We have to get there faster than we are doing at the present time. Is the government failing business by not agreeing a transition? It's not our failure. We've wanted to get into these discussions with the European Union for some time. The European Union countries need to consider the welfare and the economic prosperity of their people, as opposed to the obsession of the Commission with the concept of ever closer union. This needs to be an economic Brexit, not a political one. Economy hit by Brexit. There is a world beyond Europe, and there are a lot of international investors who are looking at the United Kingdom as a very good place to put their money. Vince Cable, Liberal Democrat leader. Productivity problem. We do have problems of chronic uncertainty. This is why in a way the whole Brexit process, whether it's good or bad, is so badly timed, because at a time when Britain was beginning to recover from the banking crisis, we've had a mega shock affecting investment. The other big problem is skills. Brexit stopped. I wouldn't say it's probable that it will be stopped, but there is a distinct possibility, I would say probably about 20% possibility, that this may not happen. The sheer complexity, the practical difficulties, the fact that the government is internally divided. We may get to the middle of next year and find this is just a horrible mess, and there will be a growing political mood in the country and in Parliament to find a way out. Debbie Abrahams, Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary. Universal credit changes in the budget. These measures come in January next year, some in January, some in April, and it's going to mean 59,000 people who over Christmas will not have adequate support. Retirement age. We need to make sure that we have a review around the state pension age, with a view of looking at a more flexible state pension retirement age as happens in other parts of the world. PNR's politics takeaway. Housing Minister says this was a housing budget. Guests FT journalist Miranda Green, comedian and broadcaster Matt Ford, Sun on Sunday, political editor David Wooding, Alex Sharma. Housing Minister. New homes target enough. We are going to make a very, very big difference. I would happily acknowledge that actually governments in successive decades of different political persuasions have not built enough homes. Brexit deal. Do I think we are going to end up with a mutually beneficial deal? Yes, I do. Northern Ireland, we want to see a frictionless border, and that is what we are aiming to negotiate. Dawn Butler, Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equality. Sexual misconduct. This is actually quite good that people are having the conversations and saying, do you mind if, and I think that's really important, because we had some reports of MPs saying it used to be okay. It was never okay. Why no female leader of Labour? Don't dismiss the fact that we've had Margaret Beckett. Theresa May's female, but she's no friend of women. Done for PM, no thanks. Backbencher of the week. Alex Burghart, who thinks the biggest danger in Brexit negotiations is that Michel Barnier overplays his hand, but there isn't any reason for talks to be held up over the Irish border. The Sunday politics takeaway. Owen Paterson and Mairead McGuinness. Angry exchange shows danger of Irish border debate. Guests Sam Coates, deputy political editor of The Times, Zoe Williams, Guardian columnist Ian Martin, Times columnist Grant Shapps, Conservative MP. What coup attempt? You have a government that at its heart is singing from the same hymn sheet. My views haven't changed, however I also accept the reality of the situation, which is we're in a very sensitive period with these Brexit negotiations. Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester. Budget. There was some good news for Greater Manchester in this budget, but overall I have to say it was pretty thin pickings for the north of England. The headline measure on stamp duty massively benefits the south over the north, and people here who are suffering every day on our clap-head-out rail system. They didn't get any good news. To have no mention of social care, no mention of police funding. These were two gaping holes at the heart of this budget. Core problem. The country is London-centric. The way that transport investment is assessed by the Treasury favors the areas where there is already greater economic growth. Watch. Owen Paterson, Conservative MP and former Northern Ireland Secretary. Irish border. It really is a very, very small problem if there is a will. Watch. Northern Irish special status. The idea that Northern Ireland is going to be taken out of the single market of the UK, where it does 87% of its trade, is absurd. The idea that politicians in Dublin can suddenly try and force Northern Ireland to stay, against the will of a very significant number of its citizens, in an arrangement that will not serve them economically and politically, is really very, very dangerous. Mairead McGuinness, Fine Gael MEP and Vice-President of the European Parliament. Irish border. Theresa May wants the situation to remain the same as it is today, post-Brexit. The only way to achieve that is to stay in the customs union and single market. Brexiteer anger at Dublin. Frankly, I'm a bit disturbed by some of the comments there. To suggest that we're blackmailing is appalling. Week ahead. Monday, the government publishes its industrial strategy white paper. Defense Secretary Gavin Williamson takes defense questions in the House of Commons for the first time. 2:30 p.m. Local time Tuesday. Representatives from the housing industry and local government brief MPs on the Treasury Committee on last week's budget. 9:15 a.m. Local time. Chancellor Philip Hammond takes Treasury questions in the House of Commons. 11:30 a.m. Local time. NHS and nursing profession representatives brief the House of Commons Health Committee on the nursing workforce. 2:30 p.m. Local time. Alan Duncan, Minister for Europe and the Americas at the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee on future UK relations with Europe. 2:45 p.m. Local time Wednesday, House of Commons Brexit Committee hears from HMRC Chief Executive John Thompson and representatives of exporters, ports and the farming industry, 9:15 a.m. Local time, MPs on the Northern Ireland Committee hear evidence from Brexit Minister Robin Walker and Northern Ireland Minister Chloe Smith, 9:30 a.m. Local time, Business Secretary Greg Clark gives evidence to the House of Commons Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee, 1000 m. Local time, Labour's Shadow Brexit Secretary Keir Starmer updates the House of Lords Constitution Committee on the EU Withdrawal Bill, 11:10 a.m. Local time, Prime Minister's Questions, 12:00 p.m. Local time, leading economists including Institute for Fiscal Studies Director Paul Johnson give evidence on the budget to the Treasury Committee, 2:15 p.m. Local time, Treasury Permanent Secretary Tom Scholar gives evidence to the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee on Government Borrowing, 2:30 p.m. Local time Thursday, 4 ministers from DEFRA, the Treasury, and Transport and Communities Departments appear before the Joint Committee of MPs on Air Quality, 9:45 a.m. Local time, Office for Budget Responsibility Chair Robert Choate at the House of Commons Treasury Committee on the Budget, 1000 m. Local time rest of weekend Goodreads, full transcript of a lecture at Hertford College, Oxford delivered on the 24th of November 2017 by the UK's former EU Ambassador Ivan Rogers on David Cameron and his decision to call a Brexit referendum. Sunday Mirror investigation into working conditions in Amazon's Tilbury warehouse and asked Sam Knight for The Guardian on how the sandwich industry changed the way Britain eats. Europe eats Trump's lunch, how the EU's disputed system of geographical indications is taking over the planet. Sunday Crunch is compiled by Tom McTague, Charlie Cooper, Annabelle Dixon and POLITICO's news editors. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop us a note at tmctog@politico.eu, C. Cooper at politico.eu, Atkinson at politico.eu. If you were forwarded this message by a friend, you can subscribe here. You can unsubscribe there too. View in your browser. Subscribe to the Politico newsletter family. Morgan Europa, Brussels Playbook, London Playbook, Sunday Crunch, Brussels Influence, DC Playbook, all our Politico pro policy morning newsletters.